The wind that day felt like a blade dragged across bare skin. It came screaming down from the high cliffs of Wyoming Territory, cutting through coats and bone, promising a winter that would bury weak souls without apology. The small settlement huddled under that sky looked less like a town and more like something the earth had forgotten. 2 wagons stood outside the trading post. They carried no whiskey, no rifles, no trade goods. They carried women. Men gathered in a tight circle, boots sunk deep in mud, faces rough from wind and loneliness. Ranchers, trappers, drifters. They had come down from high country cabins and lonely valleys for one purpose: to buy a winter companion. They called it a bride contract back east. Here, they called it what it was: an auction. Sledge, the trading post owner, he stood on a crate and raised his hands for silence. His voice boomed over the wind as he sold the last woman from the wagon. Miss Lorna Harris, strong worker, good for winter chores. She did not step forward. An outrider yanked her down from the wagon bed. She fell to her knees in the mud before the crowd. He hauled her up by the arm and shoved her forward like livestock. She was small, too thin for Wyoming wind. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. A bruise darkened her cheek. Her lower lip was split and crusted. But it was her eyes that froze the crowd. They were empty, not angry, not pleading. Empty. Men shifted their boots. Someone muttered about Kansas. Someone whispered she had stabbed her last husband. The rumor hung heavy in the air. Sledge cleared his throat. $15. Silence. When then a voice came from the shadows between the trading post and the blacksmith shed. "I'll take her." The crowd parted. Eli Mercer stepped into the weak afternoon light. He was taller than any man there, built hard and straight, like he had been carved from old timber. His coat was buffalo hide, worn and weathered. The left side of his face was ruined by old scars that pulled his mouth into a permanent crooked line. One eye looked slightly lower than the other, as if fire had once claimed half of him. Men did not move aside for Eli Mercer out of respect. They moved because they feared him. Sledge swallowed. "Coin only." Eli did not answer. He reached into his coat and pulled out a tarnished sheriff's badge. He threw it at Sledge's feet. The badge was crusted with dark, dried blood. The meaning was clear. It was not payment, but it was warning. Sledge bent slowly, picked it up, and forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Sold." Lorna was handed over. She did not resist. She walked to Eli and waited for the shove, the grip, the command. It never came. He took off his heavy coat and dropped it over her shoulders. The weight of it swallowed her. It smelled of pine smoke and cold mountain air. Warmth hit her so suddenly she almost staggered. He mounted his horse and nodded toward a smaller mare tied near the post. "Ride." That was the only word he gave her. They rode north in silence. The settlement disappeared. The land grew colder and lonelier. By sunset, they reached a high valley ringed by black cliffs. In the center stood Eli's ranch, if it could be called that. The cabin leaned to one side. The barn was half collapsed. 3 starving cows huddled against broken fence rails. A single goat bleated weakly. It was not a ranch. It was a grave. Inside the cabin, there was one narrow cot, a pile of furs by the fireplace, and a rough table. Eli dropped a sack of flour on the table and knelt to build a fire. He gestured toward the cot. "Yours." He dragged the furs to the far side of the room for himself. That night, Lorna did not sleep. She lay stiff on the cot, waiting for boots on the floorboards, waiting for the breath of a man leaning over her. It never came. He bolted the door, lay down by the hearth, and slept. The next morning he left early to check trap lines. Lorna explored the cabin. She found old bullet holes in the wall, dark stains on the floorboards, a box of tools under the cot, some crusted with old brown marks she did not want to name. Then she saw the small door in the back wall, heavy planks, thick iron lock, a cellar door. Her stomach turned cold. Men with locked rooms always hid something. When Eli returned that evening, empty-handed and frustrated, she decided she would not wait for whatever horror he kept behind that door. She kicked his cartridges across the floor. She shoved him. "Hit me," she whispered. "Get it over with." Something broke inside him. He grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. His hand swallowed her thin bone. He pulled her close, his scarred face inches from hers. Rage burned in his one good eye. She did not fight. "You're hurting me," she said quietly. The words struck him harder than any blow. He looked down at his hand, gripping her arm like iron. Horror replaced rage, and he released her as if she burned him. He stumbled back and stared at his trembling fingers. "It's the only force I know," he whispered. Outside, the wind howled like something dying on the mountain. And inside that small cabin, two broken people stood facing something far more dangerous than winter. Each other. The storm came that night without mercy. Snow did not fall gently from the sky. It slammed sideways against the cabin like a living thing trying to tear its way inside. The wind screamed through the cracks in the logs. The world outside disappeared under white fury. For 3 days, they were buried. Eli moved through the cabin in silence, feeding the fire, checking the door, saying little. Lorna watched him from the cot. She did not understand this man. He had grabbed her with force, but he had let go. He had bought her, but he had given her the bed. He had the strength to break her arm, but he had stepped back in shame. The silence between them felt heavier than the storm. On the second day, the fire burned low. The flour sack was nearly empty. The goat gave little milk. Hunger settled into the cabin like a third presence. Lorna could not sit still. She scrubbed the floor with melted snow. She mended his torn shirt without asking. She stacked wood. She worked as if motion could quiet the fear inside her. Eli watched her. He watched the careful way she moved, the way she flinched when he stood too quickly, the way her eyes sometimes went distant, as if she were somewhere else entirely. On the third day, the storm eased. Eli went to the barn and found one of the young calves frozen stiff in the hay. Lorna followed quietly. She saw him kneeling beside the animal, his broad shoulders shaking. No sound came from him, only silent tears freezing in his beard. She had never seen a man cry like that. Not drunk, not angry, just broken. She did not speak. She stepped forward and placed her only shawl in his hand. He did not thank her. He just took it. That night, hunger pressed harder. The last of the meat was gone. The wind returned, carrying the thin howls of wolves. Eli went outside with his rifle. Lorna heard the mare scream. When he came back in, there was blood on his coat and defeat in his eyes. The wolves had taken the horse. Another loss. Another failure. She saw the weight on him, and she understood the language of debt better than anyone. She stood in front of him and began unbuttoning her dress. "The horse is gone," she said quietly. "You paid for me. You are feeding me. I will repay what I owe." Her shoulders were pale in the firelight. She did not look ashamed. She looked resigned. Eli slammed his fist against the table so hard the tin cup fell. "No!" he roared. She flinched. "Get dressed," he said. his voice shaking with something that was not anger. "I am not them." She retreated to the cot, confused and shaken. This rejection felt stranger than cruelty. She had offered the only thing she believed she had value in, and he had refused it. That night, her past returned in a dream. She screamed in her sleep, fighting something no one else could see. Eli crossed the room and grabbed her shoulder to wake her. She woke in terror and scrambled away from him, hitting the fireplace stones. "Don't touch me!" she sobbed. He stepped back as if she had struck him. "I'm sorry," he said. "You were screaming." They sat on opposite sides of the dying fire. After a long silence, she spoke. "The man in Kansas," she whispered. "The one they said I killed." Eli listened. She told him about her uncle selling her, about the mining camp, about the belt and the brand heating in the fire, about the knife in the dark. "I just wanted him to stop," she said. Eli stared into the embers. "I know about killing," he said quietly. He told her about the war, about vigilantes, about revenge that never ended. He turned his back to her and lifted his shirt. Whip scars crossed his back like pale ropes. "He said I was an animal," Eli whispered. Maybe he was right. They sat in shared silence. Two survivors, two people shaped by force. The fire burned low. The cold crept in. Lorna shivered, yet she stood and moved to the furs by the hearth. "We will be warmer," she said. He nodded. They lay back to back at first, not touching. The cold pressed closer. Slowly, her trembling hand reached behind her until it brushed his. He did not move away. His fingers closed around hers. They did not speak. For the first time in years, she slept without dreaming. Days passed. The storm broke. Snow melted into gray slush. Eli hunted. Lorna cleaned. They worked side by side in fragile peace, but fear had not left her. One afternoon, while he was gone, she stared at the cabin walls, at the place that felt almost safe. Safe things had always been taken from her. She found a piece of bark and wrote with charcoal, "Thank you, but I don't belong to anyone." She left it on the table, and then she walked into the wet valley and did not look back. Eli returned at sunset with a small buck over his shoulders. He stepped into the empty cabin. The fire was dying. Her cot was empty. He saw the note. His chest tightened with something worse than rage. Fear. He grabbed his rifle and followed her tracks through the mud. He found her in the burned-out remains of an old cabin at the far edge of the valley. She was curled against a stone wall, shaking in the cold. "Go away," she cried when she saw him. "I am not your property." "I know that," he said. She wept. "You were just waiting, being kind before you break me." He stepped closer slowly. "I am not them." "You will be," she sobbed. "They all are." He looked at her and finally understood. It was not his force she feared. It was his tenderness, and losing it. He stepped closer, slowly this time, not like a hunter, not like a man claiming what was his. "I am not waiting to break you," Eli said quietly. "I am waiting for you to stay." She was shaking hard now, her back pressed against the burned stone wall. The wind pulled at her hair and dress, but she did not move. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Kindness never lasts. It turns. It always turns." He stopped a few feet away. "I don't know how to be gentle," he admitted, "but I know how to stand, and I am standing." The words hung between them. She looked at him, really looked at him. The scarred face, the tired eye, the coat he had wrapped around her, the way he kept distance instead of closing it. "You said I don't belong to you," she said slowly. "You don't," he answered. "Well, then why did you come after me? Because you chose to leave out of fear, Not freedom. The truth hit her harder than the wind. She closed her eyes. He took off his coat again and wrapped it around her shoulders. This time she did not flinch. His hands were steady. "Come home," he said. It was the first time he called the cabin that. She did not argue again. He helped her to her feet. She was so cold she could barely walk. When her legs gave out, he lifted her without force, without demand, just support. She did not fight him. She held on to his shirt. Back in the cabin, he built the fire high. He cooked venison. He handed her the first plate without a word. She ate slowly this time, watching him through the smoke. The storm had stripped them both bare. There was nothing left to pretend. That night, the wind rose again. Yet the walls creaked. Old fears crept back into her chest. She lay stiff on the cot, staring into darkness. "Eli," she whispered. He was awake instantly. "I can't sleep," she said. "It feels like before." He stood, but did not come to her. "Come by the fire," he said instead. She wrapped her blanket around herself and sat near him on the furs. They were close, but not touching. After a long silence, she shifted slightly until her back brushed his chest. He did not move. Her hand slid back carefully until it touched his. His fingers closed around hers, firm but gentle. No demand, no force, just presence. She breathed out slowly. For the first time, she felt safe without bracing for impact. Morning came quiet and gray. They woke still holding hands. It was awkward at first. He cleared his throat. She looked away, but neither pulled back in fear. Days passed. Snow melted. Mud replaced ice. The valley softened. They worked together without speaking much. She milked the goat. He repaired the fence. She mended his coat. He brought down wood. The cabin slowly changed. So did they. One afternoon, he tried to fix a hinge on the door and failed. The hammer slipped. The hinge fell. He cursed under his breath. A small sound escaped her. A laugh. It startled them both. He looked at her, surprised. She laughed again, louder this time. The sound felt strange in the cabin, like sunlight breaking through cloud. He did not smile fully. His scar would not allow it. But he made a rough sound that might have been laughter. That night, she dreamed again. She woke with a gasp, sitting up, shaking. He was at her side in a second, but he did not grab her. "I'm here," he said softly. She looked at him. Not a monster. Not a master. Just a man who stayed. "Don't leave," she whispered. "I won't." She slid from the cot and sat beside him by the fire. "I'm not offering payment," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. After a long moment, she rested her head against his shoulder. He stiffened at first, then relaxed. He wrapped his arm around her carefully, as if holding something breakable. They stayed that way until sleep found them. Weeks later, when the thaw fully came and green touched the valley again, they stood outside the cabin watching the wind move through the grass. She stepped closer to him. "You still think force is all you know?" she asked softly. He looked at his scarred hand. "I'm learning something else," he said. "What?" He turned toward her. "Choice." She studied his face, then reached up and touched the scar on his cheek. Not in pity, not in fear, in understanding. "You didn't break me," she said. His voice was low. "You didn't run." The wind that day was no longer a blade. It was just wind. And in that lonely valley, two people who had been shaped by force began building something that did not need it. Not ownership, not debt, not fear. Just two hands choosing to hold on. Together.